Thank you. Do you see my first slide?
Yes.
Great. Okay. It's not really a slide, it's just made in Google Docs, but I send it to you as a document then. Okay. Thank you for inviting me, Hannes, and thanks for being here, all of you. Just short introducing. I know you are a member of ICAN. ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, was founded by the IPPNW, by Chuck, for example. Therefore, I'm also very thankful about that because it was a very, very good work you have done before ICAN has been founded, and still we are together working on to abolish nuclear weapons. The goal was to achieve the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the TPNW. Has been adopted in the UN General Assembly, and it's really interesting on all this history that, for example, countries like Germany haven't signed till yet the TPNW. That's very interesting because of most of the European countries are talking about nuclear weapons are very bad, and we have to check that nobody gets more nuclear weapons. We all saw the what's happening with Israel, US, and the strike to Iran this year. Or Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, and it's a very very contradictory situation we are. So myself, I've been 22 years campaigner at Greenpeace Germany, especially for campaigner for disarmament and nuclear weapons, and I'm board member of ICAN Germany. I try a bit to show the two perspectives. I'm more in the perspective to which are dominating the discourse, the perspective of the geopolitical military view, nuclear weapons as an instrument of deterrence. Deterrence it's questionably it's a real deterrence. I will show it a bit more. The power projection and influence, and the human medical view, the nuclear weapons as weapons for genocide that kill indiscriminately, cause horrific suffering, and destroy the health of not only entire generations, maybe most of the population of this world we living in. Therefore, my goal today is to confront those perspectives and to show why nuclear deterrence is not a guarantee of peace. And in my or in our eyes, it's totally a wrong way. The power structures, double standards. If I'm talking too fast or not too good understandable, just give me a sign, please. Power structures, double standards. We all know the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council are also nuclear armed states. But there are also 4 more nuclear armed states, and not also only this. There has been much more states working on nuclear arms, including, for example, Germany, in their history. What they are doing is they use their veto power to ensure that they cannot be sanctioned, even when violating international law. But the other 4 nuclear armed states and their allies also operate under the law of strongest and not under the law of common law and of a common understanding what's justified and what not. They're using double standards. The NATO allies and thresholds like the German or South Korea enjoy the supposed protection of a nuclear umbrella. Other states, such Iran, I mentioned, are attacked and sanctioned over unproven nuclear programs, regardless of whether these programs actually aim to reduce. I am living here in Germany. I worked a lot to the German politics and German situation. Therefore, I have to just as an strongest example of this double standard, I want to show you what the situation is in Germany, because officially Germany isn't a nuclear armed state, but integrated, not only integrated into NATO's nuclear strategy, but has everything needed to produce nuclear weapons itself. Helmut Kohl, the former chancellor of Germany, said in an interview in 1990 that Germany isn't a nuclear state, but it will only last weeks, maximum months, to be a nuclear state. And the situation hasn't changed so much more. It's interesting. Few of you maybe are remembering the discussion about the paper from Koller, which has been published in 2000. And it's questionable, but it's extremely interesting. I by myself have been in Büchel, and not only there. I asked, had very much discussions with the former Chancellor Angela Merkel. I had discussions with the Ministry of Defense and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Germany, and I asked for documents not only regarding the stationing the nuclear US nuclear weapons in Germany, and what will happen if these nuclear weapons, if there's war, and what will happen with the nuclear weapons in times of war. I've gone to court to get these documents, and the court and the foreign ministry and the chancellor denied to give it to me because of the security the security consequences, negative security consequences, if they are made transparent. Treaties which has been made in 1959 and 1956 and 1959. Therefore, it's a very special situation in which we are in Germany, and the same in South Korea or in Japan. The disarmament obligation, I don't know how deep you are, is your knowledge about this. The NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty from 1968, obliges the members in Article 6 to engage in serious disarmament negotiations. This really happened till 1999, 2000. But for years, there haven't been significant reductions. Instead of that, all nuclear armed states are investing in modernization. You all read about this: hypersonic weapons, more precise warheads, mobile delivery systems. The Russia and China are developing new nuclear weapons, with capabilities who never had known before. According to CPRI and experts like Hans Christensen, as early as 2025, there are 12,241 warheads worldwide in the military stockpiles. More than 3,900 actively deployed, means maybe if the decision is made, they will be in the flight to their enemies in minutes. And there are 2,100 on high alert, most in the US and Russia. In arms control talks, recent US administrations have insisted on including China's arsenals, but interesting, not those of France or UK. That's a really, really interesting situation, because France and UK are both part of the NATO nuclear program, and the program and decision-taking body. The France nuclear weapons are still not under the obligation of the SACEUR, but they are discussing the same when and how they will use their nuclear weapons. And that's not the same, like, for example, what we know about that. Russia and China aren't arranging themselves together how they're answering possible threats. China, for years, had proposed a binding no first use doctrine for all nuclear powers. If you may remember that Obama also wanted to also discuss that. Biden came in power with the idea of a no first use initiative, but cancels this initiative very fast after he got the presidency. The US and NATO reject this to maintain the option of flexible first strikes, even in response to conventional attacks. That's very interesting also because if there's a conventional attack and it's has been broadened to maybe also to also hybrid attacks. That means attacks which are not made by conventional weapons, and for example also attacks on the computer networks. Concretely, the US nuclear bombs stationed in Europe are pure first-use weapons. That's very interesting. The weapons in Büchel, in Germany, they are in Büchel. Their location is known. And if they do not launch first, they would likely be destroyed in a conventional first strike. Therefore, they use it or they lose it. It's a interesting situation. So the myth of this deterrence is often said nuclear weapons prevent wars, but reality shows the opposite. The Korean War, Vietnam War, Sino-Soviet border war, Kargil conflict between India and Pakistan. Just this year, the renewed war between India and Pakistan showed not only nuclear weapon states are the aggressors, but also they maybe are the attacked ones, or they attack themselves in each other. All nuclear states have been attacked or defeated over the years. The former Soviet Union and the US-led NATO troops were even defeated in the same place, Afghanistan. Just 3 years ago, NATO had to leave Afghanistan unless they have been the most powerful conventional and nuclear armed force in the world has ever seen. Therefore, exists a few very interesting initiatives by side of the IPPNW or ICAN, nuclear wars, to end nuclear wars. The broken wings and broken arrows, it means there are history full of catastrophes or potential catastrophes. The Stanislav Petrov's case in 1983, you maybe remember, has prevented a social Soviet retaliatory strike when a satellite falsely reported US missiles. Able Archer, 1983 NATO exercise, and has been interpreted by Moscow as a real attack, and 1995, the Norwegian weather rocket, almost mistaken by Russia for a US attack. This means this broken wings or broken arrows, lost nuclear weapons like in Palomares or near Thule in Greenland, nor near collisions of accidents involving nuclear armed crafts are always happening. And any of these incidents could have triggered nuclear war through misinterpretation or technical malfunction. Famous with military exercises as a threat. Every autumn, NATO conducts the Steadfast Moon exercise to train for nuclear weapons use. That's every autumn exercise. Russia and now also Belarus are getting a high alert to see if it's really an exercise or it's an exercise which could be used for a real attack. The agreements or the arrangement between Russia and NATO states till now is that every maneuver, every exercise with more than 9,000 soldiers included has to be not only not only announced, then they have to invite people from the other side to look for the exercise, to have a real overview of what's happening. One of the reasons why Steadfast Noon, the real nuclear weapons exercise, is always under 9,000 people, so not under 9,000 soldiers. It's I talked with the Commodore, with the boss of the Büchel nuclear arms uh, flight nuclear armed jets from Germany about that, and he gave me a smile and said, "Okay, the Russians are doing the same, but he sees it as very dangerous at this situation, and he's by himself." And therefore, now the human perspective comes in. All of the soldiers I know and I've been talking to, and of the people in the Ministry of Defense know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They know what happened in Hiroshima. They know what happens in Nagasaki. And it's clear even a limited nuclear war would kill millions and cause a nuclear winter. The International Committee of the Red Cross stated no state, no organization could cope with the consequences. And therefore, the answer of the military is, okay, we have to develop smaller nuclear weapons to show we are ready to use them, but not to have such a big impact, which in all war games we know about from the US and from the former Soviet Union or from Russia doesn't function. All of these war games are ending in a global catastrophe. That means they know what happens. They know it's not working to deter the other one in the case with using small nuclear weapons, but they develop both. They will develop small nuclear weapons, but they develop also big nuclear weapons and more precise nuclear weapons at the moment. I asked them, just even the pilots who will go to bring the nuclear weapons into their targets here, what do they expect after that? And they all said, we do expect not to come home because our families will be dead. That has been a crazy situation for me and also for them. I asked them, but how can you work with this if we really have this feeling about this is the ending catastrophe? And they said, okay, it's our job. If we don't want this, we have to quit. And there are a lot of pilots who quit. A populist rhetoric and escalation risk is extremely here now, today. Some leaders speak recklessly about nuclear weapons. Trump, Medvedev, Putin, Kim Jong, even Israeli ministers publicly fantasized about nuclear strikes. It's a situation which the Federation of American Scientists with the doomsday clock say it's a situation we have never been in. It's 9 seconds before midnight. It's a horrible situation. And as the Russian security expert said, when it comes to nuclear weapons, words are already actions. And that's the truth. That's also my feeling, and that's what we are working with. If somebody has nuclear weapons and is talking about nuclear weapons, it's always a threat. And no one knows if this threat is coming to be real, a real attack or not. And therefore, not only we, but also other people, and in this case, in Germany, despite the wars in Ukraine, the Middle East, June poll showed 72% opposed still in Germany. The people opposed to nuclear weapons. That's been very interesting. If someone in German from our German colleagues here read the newspaper, the weekly Die Zeit, this has been published in Die Zeit, this this poll, and the Die Zeit showed it in a headline that young people wanted nuclear weapons. That has been the headline, not that in total 72% of all people, questioned people, showed they don't want nuclear weapons. But for me, it shows the common understanding what the nuclear weapon really is doing or is potential doing. The common understanding in the publicity is still there, and that's good because we need this common understanding more than the knowledge of the political elite, which is talking in a, for me, very, very dangerous and escalating way, how it is now. There are also other organizations or other initiatives, not like we are in non-governmental organizations. Government, for example, the Global Zero Initiative calls for a complete verified abolition of all nuclear weapons. And as you see, it's supported by very, very prominent former people of who has been part in the defense industry or in the military. That's very important because we always become, or we not always, but sometimes I get the answer, you don't know what we're talking about. Also, if they know, I'm working in this since 20 years, but to people like Chuck Hagel or James Cartwright, Michael Gorbachev, or Victor Essin, nobody can tell him, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. They knew it, and they know it, what's happening. And then conclude security is only possible without nuclear weapons. The legal assessment, the 1996 advisory opinion of the International Court states the use of nuclear weapons is always inevitable, violates international humanitarian law. And even in German, the German Ministry of Justice says the use of nuclear weapons is a war crime. It's officially on the website of the German Ministry of Justice here. But German soldiers are training, are doing every year training with nuclear weapons. They're training for war crimes. That's a contradiction. No, none of the politicians could explain me why this can happen. So the conclusion for me, for us at ICAN Germany is the geopolitical and nuclear weapons appear to be instruments of power. In reality, they are a permanent risk. And they have to prevent wars, but they have increased the risk of global annihilation. What we need now is binding first use doctrines, gradual verified disarmament, transparency and democratic control under a UN mandate, and above all, the constant remembrance of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the human dimension never disappears behind strategic calculations. Security is only possible without nuclear weapons. That's my conclusion for today. Thank you very much. And if you have questions.
Thank you, Hannes, and thank you, Christoph, for getting into quite a few of the details involved in considering this question. And I want to just again go back to the abstract that we created for this particular presentation today and discussion, which is that after 80 years after the Trinity test and the two atomic bombs were dropped by the U.S. on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we are still haunted by the images of death and destruction and the stories of the survivors. And their lessons are as important today as they were at the dawn of the nuclear age, and possibly even more so, as Christoph was just saying, since post-war, Cold War generations did not experience the dread of nuclear war that previous generations felt and still understand. Um, so Christoph addressed somewhat the issue of looking at nuclear weapons through a geopolitical and military lens and looking at them with a focus on the human impacts of their use, as told by those who survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with analysis and explanations of how these weapons threaten us today by scientists and health professionals. And what I want to focus on is the role of storytelling and how we can contribute to it, how important it is that we do. Because a lot of this discussion that we're having about nuclear weapons currently is based on this geopolitical and military lens of nuclear weapons and not on the actual use and what they do and the consequences. Those are sort of vaguely mentioned but not focused on. And when we do focus on them, I think people become more willing to consider getting rid of them. And that's what we want. That's the only sure solution to nuclear war, is prevention. That's right in our dictum of IPPNW. That's been our credo all along, is that the health response to the threat of nuclear war is to prevent it. And the only way to surely prevent it is to completely eliminate nuclear weapons. So, as I said, so much of what we focus on in discussing nuclear weapons depends on who's telling the story. So is it fundamentally a story of military or geopolitical strategy? There are many stories about the calculus about why the bomb was created and why it was used against Japan by the US in the Second World War. The movie Oppenheimer is a personalized version of one of those stories. It reflects somewhat the horror at having created such a weapon, but it also carries with it the narrative of inevitability, that we had to do it, as tragic as it might have been. Each country that has developed the atomic bomb has also had a rationale for doing so. As satirized by a mathematician and composer, Tom Lehrer, in his song Who's Next, which some of you are old enough to possibly remember. Each country that came to possess its own, possessed nuclear weapons had its own rationale. The US to beat Nazi Germany to develop it, in developing it, then to end the war in Japan, and then to keep Russia in check. Russia to match the US and keep them in check, and the UK to not seem a lesser power after having lost its empire, and so on. These days, we face a breakout of nuclear non-proliferation treaty because countries that don't possess nuclear weapons are being invaded, bombed, and bullied by those that do. The example of North Korea, which is now immune to such attacks because it has nuclear weapons and is seemingly willing to use them, is not lost on those who have watched others, such as Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who did not have WMDs, get overrun and be killed. Thus, when we talk about nuclear weapons from a strategic standpoint, they seem like a good thing to have. And this logic is causing more and more countries in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, especially, to have discussions and even make plans for possessing nuclear weapons. The NATO alliance is juggling its nuclear weapons policy now to adjust to an aggressive nuclear-armed Russia and an unreliable nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. But the discussion changes significantly when we consider what nuclear weapons actually are and what they can and will do if used. Thus, when the UN General Assembly organized the 3 humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons conferences a decade ago in Oslo, Nayarit, Mexico, and Vienna, these conferences led to the convening of the successful negotiation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017 and its entry into force in 2021. Focusing on the uniquely destructive power of nuclear weapons leads experts, ordinary people, and diplomats alike to the conclusion that they must be eliminated and banned. For now, the momentum of that treaty has been hijacked by the aggressive invasion and explicit nuclear threats from Russia the undeterred attacks from Israel and the United States on the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, and the growth of the North Korean nuclear weapons capability. A geopolitical logic has developed that causes leaders and members of the public not to focus on what these weapons do and instead upon what they can deter others from doing. This is a dangerous direction that will make it increasingly likely that nuclear weapons will be used either by accident or error or by misguided or not entirely sane military or political leaders, particularly as we increase the numbers of them that possess this capability. So how do we get people and nations back on track to focus on the unique danger of nuclear weapons that they inherently possess and become creative again in how we can reduce and eliminate them? The most effective advocates are those who have either experienced the horrors of nuclear war or nuclear testing, or those who have expertise on some aspects of what nuclear weapons individually and collectively have done and will do if used under different scenarios. So what is the role of scientific experts in making this happen? Physicists, which most of you are, or you're closely related to in this particular group, they are the ones who understood the power of the bomb from the beginning and became the first expert critics. Joseph Rotblat resigned from the Manhattan Project when he knew that the Germans would not be able to construct an atomic bomb. So he was the first nuclear protester, even before most people knew about its potential. And as you know, he went on to found, with Bertrand Russell and others, the Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs, with the Russell-Einstein Manifesto as its basis. And of course, our group, IPPNW, represents health professionals and medical professionals. And some of the earliest studies of the effects of nuclear war were done by the Red Cross, because the Red Cross hospital that was present in Hiroshima, and the eyewitness experiences that their staff had of what happened there, and their testimony, which formed the basis of John Hershey's eventually book, Hiroshima, that educated a lot of the general public about what nuclear war did in Hiroshima and how horrific it was, what a nuclear weapon did. So there have been studies on the impacts of the nuclear blast in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some of these have not been entirely ethical, but they do form a scientific basis for understanding what these effects are. There was a groundbreaking study in 1963 in the New England Journal of Medicine that was done by Physicians for Social Responsibility, which was the founding group of IPPNW. But this was back in '63, and they did an entire issue of the New England Journal of Medicine on what would happen in New England if there were an atomic attack and if all the cities were destroyed. And they spent an entire issue writing about that and discussing different aspects of it. And that was the beginning of that level of analysis. There were also physicians in the United States who came up with the idea of having dentists collect children's teeth, baby teeth, in order to record how much strontium-90 was deposited in them. And the only source of that strontium-90 would be above ground nuclear testing. And that action, which revealed that there was quite a bit of strontium-90 spread throughout the United States, led to President Kennedy and President Khrushchev signing the limited test ban treaty that banned above ground nuclear testing. So those are some of the early examples of scientists being involved in the nuclear issue. In the 80s, scientists got actively involved at all levels. Our group, IPPNW, was formed by US and Soviet doctors who were concerned about that the leaders of their two countries and the general public didn't understand what nuclear war would actually mean. And so set aside the differences that they had, these medical leaders, the political differences, and just talked about what nuclear war would mean and how important it was that we avoid it. And I think were an important factor in the discussion during that period that led eventually to, through the fortuitous leadership of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, him becoming the president, and then Ronald Reagan's clever staff and his own personal beliefs shifting and realizing that he wanted to be the peacemaker and not the war maker. And we had a breakthrough. We need to remind people of that too. I think that's really important because people feel very hopeless about the current situation, but we had a similar situation, and many of us remember this who were alive in the 80s, where people felt we might be going to nuclear war imminently, and yet we did not. And in fact, the tensions were reduced, and an enormous number of nuclear weapons were eliminated and destroyed. Not nearly enough. This opportunity was missed in the 90s. It wasn't followed through on. We allowed things to drift, and now we find ourselves in this position again. Another group of scientists that have become increasingly important in discussing this issue are the climate scientists and climate modelers, who can look at the results of using what we see from wildfires and from volcanic eruptions, what soot can do in the upper atmosphere in terms of blocking sunlight, and the massive number of fires that would occur in a large nuclear attack potentially could obscure the sun for long enough that it would cause an ice age that would be present, a severe one that would prevent agriculture for a decade or longer, and possibly result in human extinction, even depending on which scenarios you believe. The weapons labs of the United States or some of the independent scientists who've been modeling this. So their work is very important in explaining to people, especially young people nowadays who didn't grow up with this fear, but are used to looking at climate modeling because they're fearful of climate change, for them to understand. I find when I give talks that if I'm talking about nuclear winter and talking about global climate change sort of in reverse to what's currently happening with fossil fuels and CO2 and methane, they grasp it quickly. These are college students, and for the most part that I'm talking with, but I think most people have a basic idea of how global warming works and can see the potential that nuclear weapons would have for a very quick deep freeze. When we couple the expertise of these scientists with expert storytellers, such as writers, producers, directors, and actors that have produced such films as the really influential one that in the 1980s, The Day After television show, which not only caused millions of American television viewers, but even seemed to influence President Ronald Reagan, who watched it in the White House with his family, caused them to fear nuclear war and want to take action to prevent it. This was a marriage of factual information about the consequences with the emotional impact that a gifted storyteller can bring. And again, as we talk about this issue, part of it is explaining to people what the threat is, but also giving them some hope that we can succeed, because I think a lot of people are not feeling that right now. So we do need to remind them of when we've had successes, such as at the end of the Cold War, and also that seemingly intractable hatreds, such as we're experiencing and seeing right now in the Middle East, can disappear with the right people taking action and feeling that they've had enough, that they're fed up with the way things are heading. We've seen that in Ireland. Northern Ireland is the example that I give, because that was something that had been going on for centuries, and the common belief was, well, the Protestants and the Catholics will always hate each other in Northern Ireland, and they'll never stop fighting with each other. So, this is hopeless. And yet, women, both Protestant and Catholic women, got together and said, "We've had enough of this. We're fed up with this. We want you to stop doing this." And then enough politicians with enough skill got together and said, "Okay, let's make that happen." And it is held thus far. It's, nothing ever holds permanently forever, but we do need to realize that we can have successes even in things that feel intractable. So, on the horizon in the area of scientific study of nuclear weapons and war, there is the UN General Assembly has commissioned, as of last fall, a new study on the effects of nuclear war to update their 1989 study. And they just selected a scientific panel of 21 people. One of our, two of our IPPNW people are on that. Professor Andrew Haynes from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine is on it, and so is Dr. Masao Tominaga, who was the head of the Red Cross Hospital in Nagasaki, and he's a former regional director of IPPNW. And so that will begin. They're supposed to have a report finished on all aspects of the effects of nuclear war by in 2 years. So we'll be assisting and working on that. The WHO governing body, the World Health Assembly, voted in May at our urging to update its studies on the effects of nuclear war on public health, which will build upon ones that were done in 1983, 87, and a smaller one that expanded the mandate to the effects of nuclear weapons, including testing and other aspects, in 1993. And we'll be working on that. We'll be feeding the initial research in that area into the UN General Assembly study, and then publishing another study in 2029. The final study will include everything in it in 2029. In terms of the storyteller side of things, I want to report something of very exciting interest to us, which is that building on Nihon Hidankyo's Nobel Peace Prize this last year. They are the Hibakusha survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize last year. The director, James Cameron, has a new film that he will be releasing next year on a man who somehow managed to survive both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear attacks. This man was in Hiroshima visiting, and when the bomb dropped there, and he was far enough away that he wasn't severely hurt, and he was telling his boss a couple of days later in Nagasaki about his experience when they got hit by a bomb there. And so he wrote a book about this. Cameron has decided that he's going to do a movie, and he has indicated that he will be a anti-nuclear advocate, unlike the director and the others who made Oppenheimer. So he intends to use this as a pulpit for speaking about it, which is good news for us because he's a pretty high-profile director. What should Science for Peace consider in moving forward along these lines? I'm very glad to see that Stuart Prager will be addressing this issue at the next meeting, and that you guys have connected with this new American group that is trying to organize physicists around this issue. And it'll be good to learn more about what they're doing and what they propose that we do with them. Um, there's also going to be a Pugwash conference in November in Hiroshima. IPPNW is having its World Congress in Nagasaki in October, and then Pugwash the next month is going to have theirs in Nagasaki. And I learned recently, and I hadn't realized this, that there's active members from China on the Pugwash board, academics, which I think is very interesting. Um, and uh, and of course, we have here in Geneva, Sergei Batsanov, a former diplomat for Russia and for the Soviet Union before that, who is the representative of Pugwash and a very smart, reasonable guy. He's somebody who ought to be invited to this meeting at some point. I'll suggest that to him. But he's also active in the Pugwash movement. And for all their sort of creakiness and oldness and faults, they are broader and deeper than anyone else at this point in terms of having representation throughout the world. And I think we need to see how we can collaborate with them more. One area where we all need to improve is in finding celebrities in our professions. We used to have those. You had Einstein, and you had Russell, and you had Rotblat. He was less famous, but he was more famous as a anti-nuclear person than possibly as a physicist, I suppose. But and then Carl Sagan in the United States was a great popularizer of astronomy, and he was one of the original people who actually worked on the first really comprehensive nuclear winter study. But we don't have those same celebrities. We don't have celebrity doctors either involved at this point. Our founders of IPPNW were Dr. Bernard Lown, who is a very famous world-renowned cardiologist from Harvard Medical School, and his counterpart in the Soviet Union was Yevgeny Chazov, who was the personal physician to Brezhnev. So he was a pretty well-connected doctor there, you would say. And his granddaughter is now one of our co-presidents, but less able to talk with the current Russian administration than his father was by far. They're having to be very quiet right now in Russia, as you can imagine. So I think we need to be thinking about that. I think the issue has risen in profile enough that it's time for us to put it to some of these celebrities about whether or not this is an issue they could weigh in on. And I know that's on my to-do list, and I think it ought to be on yours as well, at least in suggesting names of people who would make an impact with the public and cause maybe help us kind of bend this discussion in a more productive direction about nuclear weapons. So that's about all I have to say at this point. And I'm